For so many of us, the day just doesn't really get started without that first cup of coffee, right? We know it makes us feel sharper, more awake, more focused, but what is actually happening inside our brains to give us that feeling? Okay, let's get into the real science behind your morning ritual.
You know that feeling? That jolt, that sudden clarity. But have you ever stopped to wonder what's physically changing in your brain's wiring after you take a sip? We're going to go beyond just the feeling and look at the actual electrical signals to see what's really happening in there.
All right, so scientists have known for a while that caffeine is great for vigilance, that general state of being alert. But a recent study wanted to get way more specific. They decided it was time to measure exactly how coffee hits the brain's direct response to visual information.
And this was brand new territory. Seriously, researchers knew coffee helped you pay attention, but no one had ever really checked if it directly juices up the brain's visual cortex. That's the part that processes everything you see. To do that, they needed a pretty special tool.
So to peek inside the brain's visual system, they used this incredible piece of tech. It's called the SSVP, and it is a super fascinating way to watch the brain in action.
So what on earth is an SSVEP? Well, imagine the visual part of your brain is like a huge dance floor, and all your neurons are the dancers. When you look at a light flickering at a steady beat, it's like a DJ drops a track. A strong SSVEP response means all those neurons start dancing perfectly in sync to that beat. It's a direct way to measure how tuned in your visual cortex is.
It's pretty simple when you break it down. You watch a flickering light. Your brain just naturally starts to sync up with that flicker. And all the while, an EEG cap on your head is measuring just how strong that synchronized signal is. It's a really clean, direct way to see how engaged your visual system is at any given moment.
And let me tell you, SSVEP is a huge deal. It's not just some obscure lab tool. It gives incredibly clear data without a lot of the usual noise you get from brain activity. That's why scientists use it to study everything from memory to attention. And even cooler, it's the tech behind those mind-blowing brain-computer interfaces that let people with severe disabilities control things like a computer cursor or a prosthetic limb just by looking at flickering lights on a screen. This is some seriously powerful stuff.
Okay, so armed with this amazing piece of tech, the researchers designed a really straightforward experiment to finally see what a cup of coffee does to our brain's visual horsepower.
The setup was pretty clever. First, they got a baseline reading of each person's brainwaves. Then, coffee time. After that, they had them watch a flickering light and measured their brainwaves again to see what changed. Simple, direct, and ready to get some answers. Now, they didn't just use one flickering speed. No, they tested 7 different ones. Each of these frequencies lines up with a different kind of brainwave. For instance, the super slow delta waves are linked to deep sleep, while the much faster beta waves are what you see when your brain is active and focused. By testing the whole range, they could see if coffee had a really specific effect or if it was more of a general boost.
All right, the stage is set. The data's in. The scientists were pretty much expecting to see those SSVEP signals in the visual cortex get a major boost from the caffeine. But what they actually found was something else entirely.
This was the million-dollar question, right? Did that cup of coffee actually make the neurons in the visual cortex dance harder, more in sync with the light? Was the effect something you could actually measure? And the answer was nope. The study's main finding was that coffee had basically no significant effect on the visual cortex's response. The part of the brain that physically processes what you see didn't seem to get any stronger. So, a dead end, right?
Not even close, because while the effect they were looking for wasn't there, the EEG data was showing a huge surge of activity somewhere completely different. And this is the plot twist. The big change wasn't in the back of the brain where we process vision, it was right up front, in the frontal lobe. The coffee was lighting up a totally different part of the brain than anyone had predicted.
So let's just put that side by side. Before coffee, you've got normal brain activity. After coffee, that frontal lobe gets a major boost, while the visual cortex pretty much stays the same. What this tells us is that coffee isn't acting like a pair of glasses to make your vision sharper, it's doing something completely different.
Okay, so what does it actually mean that coffee revs up the frontal lobe? Well, this is where that feeling of focus really comes from. It's not about seeing better, it's about thinking better.
The easiest way to think about your frontal lobe is as the CEO of your brain. It's the command center. It doesn't process all the raw data itself, but it's the part that decides what's important, makes plans, and tells your attention where to go. So coffee doesn't just upgrade the workers on the factory floor, it hands the CEO a megaphone and a double espresso.
Now you might be thinking, okay, that's a wild result. Can we really trust it? Well, the special data analysis method they used in this study hit an incredible 97% accuracy. That high level of precision is really important because it confirms that the surge of activity they saw in the frontal lobe wasn't just random noise, it was a real signal.
Of course, any good science is always upfront about its limitations. This was a really small study, just 6 people, and they used a lower resolution EEG. They also didn't look at any long-term effects. So while these findings are super interesting, think of them as a promising first step, not the final word. We definitely need more research on a much bigger scale.
So the next time you're sipping that latte to focus on a big project, just think about what might really be going on in there. You're not just waking up your eyes. You might actually be firing up the executive suite in your brain, empowering your inner CEO to take charge and direct your focus exactly where it needs to be. Something to chew on during your next coffee break. Thanks for tuning in.